Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Rushing, and I am going to introduce our speaker today. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Ernie Rushing. Ernie joined the School of Nursing at Duke in 2012, and he was the Director of Admissions and Recruitment there. During his time at Duke, he participated in the Duke Leadership Academy, and he was the chair of numerous regional and national committees related to enrollment and DEI initiatives. Ernie graduated from UNC Greensboro and earned his MBA at Methodist and his PhD in conflict analysis and resolution at Nova Southeastern University. My favorite part about Ernie is that he's my husband, and he graciously agreed to present to us today. Last year, Ernie was appointed the Associate Dean of Enrollment, Alumni and Student Affairs at the Vanderbilt University School of Nursing. So he's joining us, and I guess me too, from Nashville today. So thank you, Ernie, so very much. We're excited to hear from you, so you can take it away.
Sure. Can I share a screen real quick? I hope you're happy at the end of this. You might be in some of my examples. I'm kidding. If I can share, I'll pull up the a presentation that says it's been disabled. Oh, perfect.
I did mention to Courtney earlier that I'm going to get some tips because I really want to redo our bedroom. So hopefully I can also get some conflict resolution tips.
We'll see. Let's see how good you listen. But we're excited. Thank you. I think you should be able to see the screen now. Is that right? Okay. Yeah, as Megan mentioned, I'm delighted to be here looking at conflict resolution tactics. You know, one of the things that when I was asked about doing this, just tips that might be of benefit. I think we might have some supervisors and some team members looking at this. So trying to find something that would appeal to everyone. Generally, when most people think about conflict, this is probably what they would assume it would look like. Neither person happy, both pulling in the wrong directions and no one moving in any direction, just sort of locked in a standstill. And I get it. Most of the time it's uncomfortable. Most of the time it is, you've got something to lose. My hope is that you'll see that that's not always the case. If done effectively, it can be beneficial, not only for you, but for both parties. And that's the idea. If done strategically, you're able to move beyond seeing it like this. I'm not saying you're ever going to love it, but at least it's not something that is terrifying or something that you just don't want to be a part of. The truth is conflict is real. At least it seems real. And oftentimes it is something that it can be a perceived slight, but it's ultimately when two people are not agreeing on the same thing. And where the perception is reality notion comes into play is very mundane example. You go, you're walking across campus, you wave to a friend of yours, they don't see you and don't wave back. And then you start to think, what have I done? Have I done something to that person? Why are they not speaking to me? I can't believe they would ignore me after everything we've done together. And now I hate that person. You know what? Forget them. It's very easily, it goes, your brain will fire off thoughts like that. And then you'll get an email from that person and you will read the email in that made up tone and it doesn't apply. That other person is thinking about what happened to them just prior to that. You were not on their mind. They didn't see it. So now we have a conflict where ultimately nothing actually exists, right? A lot of times that's where we find ourselves in actual conflict if we just stopped and addressed it. But the truth is there are a number of ways to deal with conflict. And it takes multiple stages, multiple processes to get to a resolution that most people will find. And I'll focus a little bit more intently on this differentiation and integration process, because I think it's the most applicable and the one that's most beneficial. But if there's one thing that I would want to say, there is no one way to handle conflict. And anybody who tells you otherwise is selling you something. It is a very dynamic thing, entity, argument, negotiation, mediation, whatever it is. There are a lot of variables involved, and one size does not fit all. And so if you want the right way, you can buy my book next year, and you can read all about how to do it effectively. Just kidding. I don't have a book, but the idea is just to synthesize some of these points in something that at least is usable, and that you can take with you as you're going into your day-to-day world. The truth is, conflict is often avoided for reasons I just mentioned. No one wants to get into it. It is very uncomfortable. You feel very vulnerable. You risk a lot in your mind that, it's just safer for me not to say anything. And so you're left to deal with that on your own. That's that picture of the couple pulling the oars in different directions. That is oftentimes when people say conflict, that's where you go. The problem with that is you cannot get better, you cannot grow, you cannot mature without conflict. That's the one thing that allows you to expand your horizons beyond what you currently know and how you deal with the world. And failure to address conflict limits you and stifles your growth in every way possible. So you have to address it. I don't mean going out to pick fights. I mean, when there's an actual conflict, you need to have the confidence and the strength to be able to voice that. And that's not only from, a subordinate team member, that's also the supervisor. A lot of times they don't want to upset the team, so they don't say anything, and they'll take on extra work rather than holding a team member accountable. The team member thinks that I will say this, most supervisors are not doing anything. They're not doing a fraction of the work you're doing. And so you know what? I don't need to talk about that because it's just too much risk. I don't want to lose my job. So you don't say anything. Boy, that is a problem. Dealing with conflict, getting into conflict, discussing it, and working towards a resolution. Not only is it beneficial for you and your interpersonal relationships, your mental health, all of that, it's beneficial to the organization as a whole. And dealing with a toxic, contentious environment versus one where people feel secure and valued enough to voice opposition. If you feel like your team cannot talk to you about it, if you're a supervisor, then shame on you. You need to be able to recognize that your team has the ability to come to you. And if you are afraid to go to your supervisor as a team member, then shame on you. You need to be able to speak up and be an advocate for yourself if you feel like something is wrong. Understanding that, well, that's like 90% of this problem, is getting beyond that mentality that keeps you in the same place over and over. And what I have found, and what all the literature will come down to, is that communication is the reason why things almost always seem to break down. No one is willing to talk. No one will address what's going on. No one will effectively communicate, right? And what you'll have to realize in conflict is that people will always give you the victim's perspective. Whenever anyone explains what's happened, it's what's been done to them, never what they did. And if it is what they did, it's a one-sided view of what they did. So when you're dealing with that, you already know if you're dealing with conflict, you're getting half the story. And that goes for both parties. Ineffective communication, that is when people are unsure about what to do next. And it's, talking to Duke communicators, I will tell you, one of the things that while I was at Duke, early on in my leadership there, we did those 360 evaluations where you have your supervisor and peers, and then your team evaluates how you do. I was so cocky about my ability to communicate. All of my degrees were in communication. I knew how to do it. My team scored me lower on that than anything else. Peers was excellent communication. Supervisor, excellent communication. The lowest thing I got dinged on from my team standpoint was communication. Well, that was eye-opening. Recognizing that what I perceived was not happening. Now, what was going on, and where this becomes a problem, and you can do this and look at this from any lens within your organization and what department you're working in. Whenever you are not articulating goals, expectations, the direction of your unit, when all of that is being ineffectively communicated, the team or other people are starting to fill in gaps that they're not hearing with their own knowledge, their own, what they think is going to happen without any basis in reality at all. They'll fill in the blanks. So if you leave a lot of blanks in the steps you're going to take, and they start to fill those in, they will share that with other people. So this whole scenario that is not real becomes a very big problem, because now you can't even move forward because you're having to say, no, 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 that's not what's happening. We're not doing this. It's hard to put the genie back in the bottle whenever it's out. So ineffective communication has this ripple effect of making things your team becomes unsure about what to do, or the people you're working with, whoever the department you're working with, then because there's not enough clarity on expectations, or we take it for granted sometimes of what we're trying to do. In our minds, it makes perfect sense, but there is very little that I have found outside of fairs who think that they can tell you what you're thinking by the way you're looking at them, right? That's always a gimmick. They don't know. And when you don't tell them, they will make it up, and then they will believe it. And once they start to believe it, now they have this tunnel vision on, we've got this problem that doesn't exist with facts that aren't real, and all they can see before they can move forward is, how do you get me out of this tunnel vision? Because I think you're lying to me, because I've heard from 3 other people that this is what you're going to do, and none of it was real. So communication is important, and effective communication is vitally important if you're going to do, if you're working in any sort of large scale organization. So I mentioned differentiation and escalation. It seems pretty straightforward, but the most difficult thing to do when you're dealing with issues is separate and identify what the 2 parties are disagreeing on. It is easy to allow people. I used to, before I got into higher ed, I worked in sales, and they used to say, what was their true objection for not buying something? They would say, oh, I can't do it, it's too expensive. Or I can't. That's a cop-out. So you want to figure out what's the real reason that people are in a conflict. And it can't be vague, it has to be clear. The problem when you're trying to differentiate the sides is that it's very personal. And as you are trying to get into it, and you are trying to allow both parties to explain themselves, there are warning signs that it's going off the rails. Escalation is one of it. And you'll see this a lot of times in interpersonal relationships, where you start the name calling, the blaming, getting angrier and angrier about it. You can't move forward because there's too much in the way. And so you've got to recognize that that's happening, and you need to figure out, which we'll go in a minute, how do you bring that back down and start working towards the resolution? How do you figure out what's causing the actual friction between the 2 parties? More often, when you're in a workplace setting, it's avoidance. When you're trying to get through establish what is the cause of the conflict, no one wants to show their hand. They're afraid, they're out on a limb. It could cost them their job. They're afraid of some sort of repercussions coming back from them addressing this. So it's just easier for me to not say anything and deal with it myself than to bring it up and really tell you why I'm upset. Be aware that that's happening, especially if you are a supervisor with someone on your team. There is already a power differential there, and their tendency is going to be, I don't want to say anything that's going to damage my relationship, so I'll sit on it. And that is long term, that is not a strategy that's going to work well for anybody. It just creates more problems, and you won't see them until they start to rear their head again. That'll come 3 and 4 and 6 months down the line. The other part is, it's also easy to be very rigid. And and dismissive in the process. And if most people think about their careers, and I'll use work in this case, but they're in their careers, they have found that there were supervisors who absolutely would not listen. Nope, I'm the one in charge. I'm doing this. This is what we're going to do. Deal with it. And that's fine to an extent, but if you are looking for effective resolution, that will shut it down faster than anything else. And I'll tell you, when I came to Duke, we had a supervisor who was that way. And if you tried to address it, it escalated, and it escalated quickly. And then it became, well, I'm the one in charge. There were 13 of us on that team. 11 of us had our resumes out at that time. If you think it doesn't have an impact on your team, on your professional working environment, it absolutely does. And it happens faster than you realize. And the damage done that you have to then repair by playing it this way, that's an unintended consequence that most people are oblivious to until they're having to address it. So if you are watching any sort of resolution within a team organization, be advised that that rigidity damages far more than just that conflict. Team morale, that esprit de corps that you want between your team and all of your teammates, all of it is permanently, almost, I want 100%, 99% permanently damaged. And it takes a lot of work to repair it. So once you've got your two sides and you know what those areas are, then you can address the integration part. This is when you start to the resolution. If you've been clear about what the sides are, and everyone has agreed that those are correct, then you can't push somebody to being submissive and just taking whatever, because they're not hiding behind anything. They haven't dismissed the argument. They haven't tried to shut down conversations. This is where you want to get to. You have to go through the difficult part of setting up the parameters and the sides so that you can work on this. Once both parties recognize that the conflict is real, that here's where we stand and where the gaps are between our two sides, then you start to work on finding those efforts of bringing it together. But it never goes as clearly as we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about this, and we're both going to be happy and it's addressed in 30 minutes. It's not that clean cut. Most of the time, if you look at these destructive patterns, this is what it looks like. I won't read them to you, but if you've ever been in a conflict, and these are the things to watch out for. And I can tell you that I have done, and I have had done to me every one of these, just about all of them at one point or another. And what happens when you get yourself into these situations is that if you're not recognizing that it's happening, then people continue to dig in their heels, that rigidity hits, and then everything shuts down. So just recognize that anytime these show up, that you are sabotaging the potential for a resolution. So Bill Urey has synthesized a lot of dispute resolution tactics and issues to these three areas: dealing on the interests within the parties. What are they? Why do they matter? Rights. The key question in that is who gets to determine that. And that's important. And then power. Who has more to lose? That's something that we got to consider. So when you're dealing with interests, this is very simply what people want. This is what they're wrestling with, is how to come to terms with what's being asked versus what they want. The needs, desires, concerns, or fears, they will express them. This is why it's emotional, dealing with interests, because it's very personal to the person. And when you're dealing with work environments, this is where the negotiation of back and forth comes in. And it's almost always going back and forth over what the organization or you as the supervisor wants and what they want as a member of the team, employee of the university in this case. But it requires that there be a space where they can express those emotions without fear. And so that you'll hear that a lot, that a lot of times there is an intimidation to do that because of what they fear in retribution. And you have to make sure that that is not part of it, and express that. And part of going through this reconciliation process. Who is right, right? This is generally what you're dealing with in contracts. But if you are in an organization, where it comes in is unwritten rules. What's the unwritten way and the unwritten expectations that everyone sort of agrees upon? It's the social behavior, social determinants here of your work environment. The problem with that is because it's not written down, as people leave and new people come on, they are completely unaware that these precedents exist. And if you haven't been explicitly clear on having written down processes on what your expectations are that everybody agrees to, this is where we start to have conflict. Within an organization, it's, since we're not we're a right to work state without unions and all of that, that's when the management and staff and labor usually have a clash is on those rights. For places like Duke, it's the clash of this sort of open-ended, this is how we've always done things, but that doesn't make sense to me, but we've always done it that way, and you can't, that's the only leg you have to stand on. Well, now we've got issues. And when it comes down to it, usually HR gets involved as to who's right and who's wrong. When it gets to that point, that's a problem, and it's all done because we're going back to unclear communication of the matter. And then power, it seems pretty clear cut. You have the ability, and usually it comes with a title. In most cases, the thing that I would say is power is very relative. It's not so much who has more power, but who is less dependent on the other person. That is the dynamic where power is somewhat subjective, but in a very real way, it is. If you've ever had someone who was a rock star on your team, and you know that if they left, it shuts almost everything down until you can find someone like them, versus someone who you could replace in 30 seconds. Well, my guess is both people know that. Some might not want to agree to it or recognize it publicly, but there are some who are vital. And if they know that, that's where power becomes somewhat subjective to, rather than just relying solely on title. But you can use this. Power plays they will sabotage and undercut almost everything, because it's an iron fist and there's no way around it. Once you've thrown that gauntlet, you can't take it back. And so the idea is, if you were looking at a conflict here, you can't address the interests of someone without recognizing the rights and then the power that's within that. All three of those factors play in the resolution. And as if you are working on resolution, recognizing that failure to recognize those different rings and the role that they play, that could be to a detriment to you and what your outcome you would like to have happen. If you're dealing with rights, interests don't matter, because we're dealing with protocol, and we're dealing with precedents, and we're dealing with things. So how I feel about it is irrelevant. It's what the expectations are, and then the power. And then power is your, that's your poker. I'm all in. I'm going to risk it all and either lose or win. And so when you're willing to take that risk, that's your last cards to play, and you hope it goes well, but you have to be willing to lose that, because there's no room to come back once you've made that case. So in dealing with resolution, there are basically these 4 bullet points have got to be agreed upon before resolution can happen. That both parties have to recognize the relationship. They have to agree that there is an actual conflict. And as I mentioned, this is a little more difficult than it often seems that it would be. I mentioned that, I can't tell you how many times I have been in trouble with Megan for something that I did in a dream. And I think, well, this isn't a real conflict. I don't agree with this. Hopefully Dream Ernie will apologize. So when you are working with real conflicts here, you have to make sure that everyone agrees that there is a conflict. You have to agree that resolution's possible. Both parties have to recognize that, and you can't diminish the other person as being insignificant in the process. Everyone, it's a 50-50 negotiation, and they're both valid points, and they have to be seen as such. Until you get to until those 4 boxes are checked, nothing happens. And what it looks like is you negotiate that context, and once everyone's there, you have that specific negotiation that you can talk about. Where's the problem? Let's address it. And as you're addressing it, you'll start to notice those escalation and all of those things that sort of get in the way start to rear their head again. It's personal. Well, when you have to negotiate context again, you have to go over and address those things. Let's focus on the issues. You can become issue specific and then work on the resolution. And it goes back and forth. There's an ebb and flow to any sort of resolution if you're being honest and authentic and are really working towards resolving the problem. And so there's a very popular book that Bill Urey wrote called Getting to Yes. And in that, he breaks out, this is how you get to yes in any sort of conflict or negotiations, which is what conflicts are when you're trying to resolve. Separate people from the problem, focus on interests and not the positions of people, invent options for both parties to gain, and to use objective criteria. And that is all very well and good. I also think that it is Pollyanna-ish and pie in the sky sort of take on it. And in reading that, I don't know if anybody has ever read any, education books on people going on elementary education. When they talk about what to expect in a classroom, it's somewhat laughable. Like, you're going to have these 25 angelic children who never misbehave, and on the one chance that they do, if you'll do these things, then they will never be disruptive in your class again, and they will hang on every word, and they will be little perfect angels for you. And then the first day they go into student teach, they find that not one word of that was true. So then what do you do, right? So there is the reality. Most of the time when dealing with conflict, it's never going to be as straightforward of saying, here's what I think, here's what I think. Great, we're in agreement, let's move forward. In organizations, this is what it oftentimes looks like. The only difference is that this criticism is happening to Brian's face, rather than behind their back in parking lots after work with eye rolling about, can you believe what he said, right? So this is what reality actually looks like when people are dealing with difficult situations. So if yes is not an option, what do? There's another book that he wrote that I think is better than yes, and that is Getting Past No. And this is, what do you do when it's going off the rails, right? Can't react. And how he defines that is you just go to the balcony. If you are sitting in the front row, all you see is what's on the stage. But if you'll go back to the balcony, you can see the entire picture again. And how the benefit of that is, it gives you a minute to take a breath. The first person to lose their cool in any sort of negotiation is going to lose, because you're not thinking clearly anymore, and you have to think clearly to make sure that you are an advocate for you and your side of what you think is going on. You can't argue. This is very easy to do, and how you get away from that is try to see things from their side of the argument. And you have to be willing to take that step around, because what you're able to do, if you will see that, you can understand why they're upset. And then you do step 3, which is, don't say, no, that's a bad idea. If you can recognize where they're having the issues, you can reframe the conflict a little bit, knowing what you know about your side. But if you've seen it from their side, you can start to see, okay, this makes sense to me. Can we look at it like this a little bit, and see, am I understanding that this is what you would like? And you would, yes, if you could get them to agree with that. This is this golden bridge mentality. This is a way for them to save face and allow them to agree without saying, I have beaten you, and now they're humiliated, because then the rigidity comes in and you can't get there. So both people have to recognize this without being humiliated. And then you don't escalate it. You educate what's going on. You talk through the process and what the outcome would be and the benefit of all of that. This is very oversimplified, but the reality is, this is, I have used most of these in my life at this point, and they are very effective, because it gives you a chance to either catch your breath, don't snap back at someone, recognize where there are options for both parties to feel like they're getting what they want, even if it's a little bit different from what the 100% of what you want. Getting 90% of it is great. And then you try to make sure you've got the infrastructure in place that it doesn't keep coming back. I'm trying to make sure we're good. Yeah. Okay. So I had 30 minutes. I hit it pretty much right on the nose. And at this point, if there's anything that you would have questions about, please let me know.